Huge changes are imminent as multiple reports have detailed a trade is incoming for this Milwaukee Brewers team, as they are going to be parting ways with a pitcher at this year's trade deadline. We're going to be breaking it down, what this deal could entail, and we're also going to be covering here at the end of the video what is next for this Milwaukee Brewers team. We're going to break it all down here in this video. Before we do, ladies and gentlemen, be sure to hit the sub button if you haven't already. We're having all your Milwaukee Brewers news throughout the rest of the season and heading up in this last week to before the trade deadline. You won't want to miss it. We're going to have everything here about the Brewers. But we need to jump straight into this right now, going over what the latest is on the Brewers trade market. I'm going to pull up an article here going over Stephen Nesbitt's quote from The Athletic. As the Brewers look to add at the trade deadline, surely they'll hear from GMs of non-contending teams who want to toss in Bryan Hudson into the return and think perhaps they can unlock his 2024 form. And he goes on to say that you can almost guarantee to see a trade involving Bryan Hudson. Now, this is where things get a bit interesting for the Milwaukee Brewers, because this is not a player that we really saw going to be a major trade target for multiple teams that are going to be looking as contenders now when it does come down to it, because of what he's been doing this season. We're kind of in a weird situation with Bryan Hudson, as multiple kind of details and kind of looking at his past career throughout, this season comparing to last season, and what this means for teams looking for multiple pitching prospects and, not just prospects, but, kind of assets. He's a very interesting one with what comes down to and where we saw him in the 24 campaign to comparing this to this year's 25 campaign. I'm going to pull up his stats right now, kind of taking a look at where the difference is, kind of evident here. You look at his 24 campaign, going over 43 games, 6-1 record, and, an 8.57 win percentage, but the big thing there is the 1.73 ERA in 62 innings. He was a phenomenal pitcher for this Brewers team last year, and going over and, his entire stats throughout the season, he's shown what he was made of and why they acquired him from the Dodgers. And now going to look at this year, we kind of expected some big things coming in from him, another asset, and looking where the Brewers are currently without a guy like Bryan Hudson, and what we saw last year, going at a pretty abysmal, I'll be honest, 4.35 ERA, and comparing that to, just 12 games this year, sent down to the minors, it really goes to show where he currently stands. And the 28-year-old still, I think, has a lot of potential left, and I think a lot of teams are realizing that as well when it comes down to looking at the quote that Stephen Nesbitt said. A lot of non-contending teams are looking for his assets. And once again, I kind of mentioned this as well in the past few videos, that a lot of these players we're talking about in these trades don't seem to be one-for-one deals. It seems like they would be part of a separate trade, in addition to bolster a trade package that would entail helping out the Brewers in this case. Now, of course, Bryan Hudson is someone that, has a lot of potential, and when you do take a look at what he's been able to bring and what he can bring, once again, the difference that we saw from this year to last year, that doesn't mean that he don't have that anymore. That doesn't mean that, it's gone, it's completely out, and there's no chance of getting it back. I think a lot of teams, and as we saw Stephen Nesbitt say, a lot of non-contending teams are willing to make that kind of splash and try and get him back to his 2024 form, just in a different scenario. And of course, when you're looking at the kind of differences between last year's roster compared to this year's, there's not a whole lot of difference, but you see some people struggle, and, that's just a thing that you see in today's game. And it's going to be something that I think the Brewers are also going to be willing to take the chance on keeping him and getting him back as well. But according to Stephen Nesbitt, things are going to be changing here for Bryan Hudson, and his scenery may not be with the Brewers much longer. Now, as I mentioned as well, when you go and take a look at what he's done in the AAA system as well, it really hasn't been great either. And continuing in this article goes to show Hudson hasn't been great in AAA either this year, with a 6.65 ERA in 23 appearances. The pitchers who have had dominant stretches in the majors tend to get second chances because reliability from a lefty reliever is worth the weight in gold come October. And not just a lefty reliever, but also another sidearm pitcher. And I think that's why he has a bit more value than what many other pitchers of his caliber would for the Brewers. And, of course, when you're looking at October time and you're looking at all of this, you need everybody going, and you see some unlikely heroes in that instance. And I think the Brewers do believe that Bryan Hudson can be one because of what he did last year. That stretch didn't happen for a fluke. That was not something that they're going to discard after this season because of what he's done. Yes, he may be in AAA for this time being, and of course for the next little while, but when October comes, he may be a completely new pitcher and back to what he was in 2024. So I think the Brewers are going to hold him at a pretty high value if traded. And of course, what Stephen Nesbitt had to say, it seems like something like that could be imminent. And I want to pull up another quote here from Stephen Nesbitt going over what he has to say. It says, as the Brewers look to add the trade deadline, surely they hear from GMs, once again, non-contending teams, but this is what he had to continue with. You may remember Hudson as a sidearm, soft-tossing lefty with a sub-1 ERA halfway through the 2024 season. Indeed, same dude, but by last season ends, Hudson had been sent to AAA due to a velocity decline, and that's where he spent most of this season too. And of course, when you're looking at the velocity decline as a soft tossing lefty with a sidearm, the velocity is not something that I think you're really relying on. You look at lefty pitchers, there are some, flame-throwing lefty pitchers, and a lot of those are kind of starters, and you see that in the past, but when it comes down to it, there's also some very sneaky good left-handed sidearm pitchers, and, not even just sidearm, left-handed pitchers that have some break, have some, a bit of a decline in velocity, but also come out and show what they can really do by kind of working around the strike zone. And I think that's, once again, what Bryan Hudson needs to work on rather than just velocity. And I do have a screenshot here that we're going to jump into here now in a moment, right? And kind of looking at where the velocity has gone for Bryan Hudson over the past few seasons. And you look at the kind of decline that he had over from the 23 to 24, now to 25 halfway through the season about. It's definitely taken a pretty big decline compared to, around the 96 range when he's topped out in 2023. When you go down to it, kind of around that 95, 94 range, and now kind of sitting at, once again, just a 93, 94. So Bryan Hudson really needs to just going to have to work on his stuff if he wants another chance here with the Brewers. But when it comes to a trade that the Brewers are going to be looking at and, kind of comparing that to what Bryan Hudson will bring, it's a lot of interesting things because, 28 years old, 6'8", 250. He's a big guy. So if he can be able to get that arm speed up, to be able to get the velocity back up, things will be looking good in his kind of realm of what he's able to do and what he's able to bring to this Brewers team or really any other team. And that could also up his trade value, later on in the season. And or I guess not later on this season, but for what teams are going to be looking at later on in this season. And I want to pull this up because these are the names that we're currently looking at as Brewers possibilities, which could be thrown in. Bryan Hudson could be thrown in to up and increase the package value for this team. And they're looking among teams who could be in play for the Diamondbacks, Eugenio Suarez, along with Rockies, Ryan McMahon, and even the Cardinals, Nolan Arenado, who has a full no trade clause. They would like an offensive upgrade at shortstop where Joey Ortiz has struggled. They've been linked to two speedy Marlins infields, which we made a video on yesterday, so be sure to check that out, and Xavier Edwards and Otto Lopez. So there are a few names that, are among the value that I think the Brewers are looking for, adding a good bat while also staying at the fielding, and we know that the Brewers are going to be looking for a bit of pop, and they have the pitchers to be able to make it happen. So if they have already kind of subsided the Bryan Hudson theory and kind of gone with that and don't think that they're going to be able to find anything else out of Bryan Hudson, there are multiple names here that would be looking to get a bigger package in return. And, a lot of those teams are going to be kind of in that rebuild phase, among the Rockies, Diamondbacks. I wouldn't even necessarily say Cardinals, but they would be willing to, I think, take another guy on like that in Bryan Hudson's caliber who really has that potential to get back to where he was in the 24th season. And I do believe that Bryan Hudson would be in a package for really any of these players among pitchers that we're also going to be talking about. We do have another video coming later today about an Eugenio Suarez trade that is going to be very interesting, and you're going to want to stick around for that. But at the end of the day, I think Bryan Hudson's in a pretty good spot when it comes down to looking at the trade value for the Brewers. But I also do think that the Brewers are going to be keeping a very close eye on him with what he has to bring back from the 24th season. So it's going to be interesting. But one more note before we do finish this video off. We have a game tonight versus the Marlins, or this evening, I should say, getting later toward for me. But Freddy Peralta on the mound tonight against Cal Quantrill from the Marlins. I think it's going to be a very good game. I think this is going to be another big test for the Brewers. Even though the Marlins are not the greatest team, you get Freddy Peralta on, you got to get your power bats in, see what we can do on the offensive side of things to get this rolling, because you really can't afford to lose games like these to the Marlins and these caliber of teams. So I think it's going to be a good test tonight, and I think we're going to get a good idea of what we're going to be looking for specifically at the trade deadline in tonight's game. So let me know what you think about that, but that's all I got in this video. If you did enjoy, give it a like, hit the sub button as well. I'm signing out, though. Thanks for watching. You have a great day. See you later.